So, just got back from The Incredibles 2, and I thought it was great. Let me back up and give some more detail. So the first Incredibles came out 2004, I think, which, how time flies. It was a long time ago now, 14 years ago. Lots of people grew up with it. I didn't grow up with it. I graduated from college in 2000, so I was already an adult by 2004. And in fact, I didn't even see it in 2004. I didn't see it in the theaters. You know, I was an adult. It was a kids' movie, but it began to get some buzz. People were talking about it a lot. So I rented it one summer afternoon when I had a day off from work, and I watched it, and like everyone else, I was really blown away with it. I really enjoyed it. The original Incredibles movie was it was really fast paced. There was a lot of things happening, and there was a lot of action, but it was also like really funny. There was a lot of great, that opening scene, there was so much going on. It was really fast paced and kind of a lot of action was going on. But then there was all these kind of jokes and one-liners, and it was just, well, I don't need to convince you. Everybody knows that The Incredibles was a really good movie. I don't know, this is my own kind of intuition. Tell me if I'm off here. I think that ending scene, when I first saw it, and I didn't see the year it came out, but I saw it around 2005, 2006. I thought that ending scene was just so great. Like, there was action, and the action kept getting bigger and bigger, and they kept trying to stop that robot. And I think maybe what's happened in the years since then is just, like each summer movie is bigger than the summer movie before it. I think that was like a really exciting action sequence for its time, even though it was an animated movie. I think nowadays it's maybe just become ordinary. I don't know. What do you think, Internet? What was it more impressive when it first came out back in 2004? Has this kind of thing become commonplace? Or, I don't know, was it always kind of, I don't know. Anyways, I've seen it a few times in the years since then when it's been on TV and stuff like that. So when Incredibles 2 came out, I was all on board for that. Actually, sorry, let me back up a bit, because I want to talk a little bit more about what made Incredibles really fun, because I think that will kind of influence how we view The Incredibles 2. So, I think there were a number of kind of fun things going on in The Incredibles movie, the first one. One was this kind of whole kind of deconstruction of superheroes. They have kind of midlife crises. There was like a golden age of superheroes, and now they've all kind of disappeared. Now this was before that Watchmen movie came out. And the Watchmen comics came out way back when, but very few people read comics. It's got a kind of devoted following. But I never read the Watchmen comic until the movie came out. It was something I vaguely knew about. So I think I'm going to count The Incredibles as predating Watchmen, even though I know the comic book came out before that. But kind of in the popular consciousness, this was kind of the deconstruction of superheroes was, for the movie audience at least, kind of before Watchmen. And then also, yeah, the whole kind of, not only the deconstruction of superhero thing, but the whole kind of superhero going through a midlife crisis, kind of rediscovering his family. I mentioned both of those because I think both of those were kind of what made the original Incredible movie so fun. And both of those were kind of cards that had already been played, which means the sequel's not going to be as groundbreaking as the original one. They're not going to be able to go through and deconstruct the superheroes all over again. They're not going to be able to do the story about the superhero with the midlife crisis stuck in an insurance company, because they already did that. Those stories have been told. So I think this is one of the reasons Brad Bird spent like 14 years before he finally got a sequel together. I think really the only thing you could do from this point on is just do another superhero adventure. Like, okay, say here's a new bad guy, getting the back in action, we're fighting the new bad guy. You can't do all the amazing things that were in the first one, but you could send them off from some more adventures if you wanted to hang out with more of these characters. So I say that because I think some people had expectations that were too high for this movie. Really, there's only a limited number of things the sequel could have done. I don't know, in my opinion. Maybe Incredibles 3 will prove me wrong and show that they can do something fantastic. But in my opinion, you kind of have to lower your expectations for the sequel. That being said, I'm perfectly willing to spend more time with these characters. I'm on board for another adventure. So, yeah, I was happy to go along for the ride and kind of go along for another incredible movie. I think, all that being said, even though there's some things that the sequel can't do, there's some things that the sequel really did do well, and which was really a lot of fun. I thought the general kind of atmosphere was a lot of fun. And, one of the things, again, the difference between 2004 and now, is because we're in danger of suffering from superhero fatigue. There's so many superhero movies out now, which wasn't as true back in 2004. But what makes The Incredibles so fun is it's not only a superhero movie. It's also kind of a James Bond movie. I mean, there was just so many things in here that were just classic 1960s James Bond. I mean, not the new Daniel Craig James Bond, but the Dr. No James Bond. Just kind of the whole aesthetic of it. The theme music, of course, the theme music is very kind of Bond-esque. The design and stuff like that, the secret layers and all the kind of stuff, the jets and the gadgets, it's all very Bondy. And then there were some other influences. Jonny Quest and The Outer Limits, and I know I don't get any credit for catching those because the movie put those right in the movie itself. So you saw that, and then you saw the next scene, and then of course you made the connection. But even though I don't get any points for catching it because the movie itself kind of broadcast its influences, those influences were still there, and they were still kind of cool. I mean, The Outer Limits, I used to love The Outer Limits as a kid. I'm of course too young to remember when it was originally on air in the 1960s, but I watched the reruns in the 1990s, and I thought it was such a cool, kind of spooky, eerie show. And then, they reference it right in The Incredibles. And then they do a bunch of kind of spooky, kind of cool things like the voiceover with the screenslaver, or when Elastigirl's going into the screenslaver's apartment, and then all of a sudden you hear the voice like, "Find anything you like," and then those lights start flashing. I thought that was kind of very kind of evoking the atmosphere of an Outer Limits episode. And then the other thing was Jonny Quest. And again, I don't get any credit for catching that because the movie broadcast it, right? So the Incredible family is watching TV, Jonny Quest is on TV, but then they go right off to another adventure that's kind of like a Jonny Quest adventure. They're kind of out on this Jonny Quest like boat that looks like it's from a 1960s cartoon, and then there's a flying jet which also looks like it's from a Jonny Quest cartoon. And then speaking of Johnny Quest, I guess, you know, the Venture Brothers, which is itself a riff on Johnny Quest, but there was kind of elements of the Venture Brothers here, kind of this wacky team of kind of superheroes with kind of a Hanna-Barbera-esque look to them. You know, like they look like they could have been out of a 1960s Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Some of them, like that kind of bird type creature I'm thinking of specifically. And they're all on this boat with that big showdown. Yeah, so you have all these kind of retro 1960s quiche stuff, kind of being jumbled up, and it really made for a lot of. It was a fun movie. The visuals were kind of conveying that style and that atmosphere and evoking those influences. The music cues were evoking those influences. The storyline. So, you know, it wasn't just another superhero movie. It was a superhero plus James Bond plus Johnny Quest movie, and it was just a lot of fun. I mean, it was just a good, fun, retro type cartoon, modern blend. And that ending action sequence, I mean, action sequence meaning the whole kind of climax at the end, was really exciting. Now, I was thinking to myself as I was watching it, I thought, you know, the action itself isn't all that mind-blowing. Like, it's not all that involved or something. It's not necessarily more intense than other action movies, other cartoon movies even. But there was a whole bunch of quick cuts, and there was some dramatic music, which really kind of, I don't know, the music sold me on it. I think the quick cuts and the kind of the dramatic music made the action sequence seem maybe more exciting than it was. But no complaints. You know, I mean, that's part of the craft of movies, right? Is to kind of make things more exciting with those music and the quick cuts and stuff like that. So I'm counting this as a win. They had me. I really enjoyed that last scene. There were a number of kind of good action scenes throughout this movie, and of course there were some good laughs as well. I don't think it was as funny as the original, but then again, as I said in the as I said before. It really couldn't have been, because the original was when they were setting up all these jokes about this world and, you know, the ludicrousness of like this superhero forced to work in an insurance company. And those are all the jokes that had been part of the premise of the original and couldn't have been replayed twice. So it couldn't have been as funny as the original. That being said, just for the record, it wasn't as funny as the original, but it was still good. There were some good moments in it. The fight with the raccoon was funny. What else was funny? I can't remember now, but I had a few good laughs in the movie theater. Yeah. When they went to the restaurant to meet the boy Violet Light, that was quite funny. Yeah, there were a lot of kind of good laughs. Of course, the whole Mr. Incredible staying at home with the kids, not understanding how to do the new math. Yeah, but by the way, while I'm on the subject, that new math thing is an anachronism, right? I mean, when did new math come out? Early 2000s or something? Late 90s? And The Incredibles are supposed to be kind of set in the early 60s, but I know you can't get hung up on this because the whole thing is an anachronism. I mean, actually, for the most part, they did kind of have a good, consistent visual thing with kind of like 60s tech. Even when it was futuristic, it was like futuristic 60s tech. Again, this is another nitpick, but right when that boat was going to run into the city, right? was being broadcast live on television, which I don't think you could have done in the 60s because they didn't have live broadcasts. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I think maybe you could broadcast live from the studio, but you couldn't just kind of broadcast live from any location. The cameraman had to go out and shoot the film, and then they had to carry the film reels back to the studio to get broadcast. I know you can't worry about anachronisms in a movie like this because the whole thing is in its own separate universe, and there's so much futuristic kind of stuff mixing in with the 1960s. Actually, speaking of which, this is a good segue to the other thing, the screenslaver. I read an interview, or not an interview maybe, a kind of a quote from Brad Bird. And I forget where I read this, somewhere on the internet. Somebody was kind of asking him about Screenslaver. And they said, you know, Screenslaver would be a good villain nowadays, right? Because like now everyone is controlled by computer screens. I mean, think how much of our lives we spent looking at computer screens or smartphone screens or something like that. I'm talking into a screen right now. You're watching this from a screen. Irony. You get the point. So like it would be a really topical thing to do now, but the Incredibles is kind of set in the 60s type universe. And Brad Bird said, well, I don't know. You know, when I was a kid, people were freaking out about kids watching too much TV. So it's something that's been kind of topical ever since there was television. And I was thinking about this and I thought, well, yeah. In fact, it was probably more topical back then because television was new. Now, I mean, nowadays, unless you're really old, you grew up with television. I mean, even the people who are like in their 60s and 70s now grew up with television. So it's not something where people are like, oh my God, what is television doing to the kids now? It's like, television is normal now. Everyone's grown up with it. Your parents grew up with television. But I think back when television was first coming out in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s and stuff like that, people were freaking out about it. Like, oh, what is this doing to the kids? It's turning everyone's brains into mush, stuff like that. You know, I think you can go back and kind of read articles from the time. So in that respect, kind of this this worry about what television was doing to society at the dawn of the age of television makes kind of Screenslaver kind of an appropriate villain for that time piece. I think it's talking about the issues of television screens. I would be embarrassed to tell you how much of my day is spent in front of screens of one form or another, either using the computer for work or using the computer to watch videos or watching TV or watching movies or something like that. But I'm not proud of it. I have moments when I think to myself, what am I doing with my life? And I think that's fairly normal. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit more prone to kind of worry about this stuff. But I think that's just kind of part of being the modern world, is that we all watch screens all the time, and we all kind of hate ourselves a little bit for it, and kind of, imagine a simpler time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that even though TV has become the new normal, I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. Like, maybe Screenslaver and his rant about how people were giving up their own lives in favor of watching stuff on screen. Maybe there's something to that, even though it's cliche and has kind of been something people have been worried about now for the past 60, 70 years. Maybe it would have been better if TV had never kind of come into our living rooms. I mean, I say that knowing that there's kind of no stopping technology. And it's hard to give up the bad things about TV without giving up the good things. I mean, think about news and educational materials on television and stuff like that. Yeah, but I thought for a cartoon movie, there's kind of a half a point being made with the screenslaver villain. The other, Brad Bird, he gets a little bit philosophical, doesn't he? There was some interesting conversations there between Elastigirl and, what was the name of that woman? But they were talking about inventing something versus sales. And, at first she was like, well, obviously it's better to invent something than to sell something. And then Elastigirl says, well, the seller has a lot of buyers, so they actually control the culture. And you'd be better off being a seller than an inventor. And I thought, oh, this is getting actually pretty interesting for a kid's movie. I know it's not college level philosophy, but for a kids level movie, that's some stuff to chew on there. So I thought, all right. I think another tidbit I've picked up on the internet, I guess much has been made about Brad Bird, and apparently he's a fan of Ayn Rand and Ayn Rand and the objectivist philosophy. Now I'm more on the left side of the spectrum myself, but I read an Ayn Rand book about 10 years ago just to kind of see what all the fuss was about. I read The Fountainhead, and I didn't actually hate it completely. I think there's a danger to this maybe if you push this too far and say, I don't have any obligation to help anyone else, I'm only concerned with myself. At that point, you're kind of getting into like right-wing jerk territory. But I think some of her basic ideas about how people are individuals and you can't just expect everyone to conform to society. People have got to be themselves, and they've got to be able to find themselves and just not do what everybody else wants them to. I like that aspect of it. So I don't think the philosophy is totally despicable, I guess. I don't hate it completely. And then there were elements coming out in this movie which I thought, yeah, maybe there's something to that. The Brad Bird's kind of Ayn Rand philosophy. Now, I think you do have to balance that out with our collective responsibility for each other. We do have to take care of each other, but you also need a society in which people are free to become what they want to become. So I'm gonna split the difference on that and kind of hedge my bets and mix my metaphors, and say I can kind of see some of it. What else is there to talk about? Actually, maybe I've gone on long enough. Point is, I really enjoyed this movie. Excellent movie, 9 out of 10 stars. Go catch it if you have a chance.